Hi there. So a while back ago, I discussed 5 things which you should look out for when getting a new laptop, and in the video, I promised I was going to do a follow-up video where we'll talk a little more broadly about these things. And in this video, we'll be talking about that. And so, if you've not watched that video, the link in the description, which you're seeing on your screen right now, you can click it and go and watch that video, so you can have a sort of good foundation to this follow-up video. And so in this video, we'll be talking a little bit in depth about those things that you should look out for when getting a new laptop. I'll try as much as possible to be as succinct as possible because there's a lot to talk about. So without wasting much time, let's get into the video. Before getting any laptop at all, you would want to choose which platform you want to operate on. So broadly speaking, we have 2 platforms. We have the Apple laptop, the Windows laptops. So the Apple laptop, of course, predominantly MacBooks, and then we have the PC platform, which is predominantly Windows. We also have other platforms you can work on and things like that, but I mean, generally speaking, it's Apple and Windows most of the time. So choosing between these 2 platforms shouldn't be a problem based on what you want to do, but for most of the population, any platform is fine. There is no significant advantage of one platform over the other if you're just an average user. Peculiarities, there are a lot of peculiarities with either platform you choose. The Apple platform is known to have the iOS, everything and all that. Apple basically is known to have a very restricted environment, although they have very good UI UX experience, which is still because they have a restricted environment, which is both a plus and can be a minus. It's a plus because usually you have less issues of having a variety of problems when it comes to software and hardware. So Apple makes hardware and software that for their products. So the kind of hardware and software you find for Apple products are made for them. On Windows, on the other hand, you have hardware and software made by third-party companies. So many influences here and there when it comes to Windows. So if you have a virus or if you have an error code or something like that, it could be from a zillion reasons, because I mean, you have so many things that your system can be exposed to when it comes to the Windows platform. But then the plus on the other side is that you can explore a lot of things when it comes to the Windows platform, which you may not be able to sufficiently do with the Apple platform. It's not bad in that sense, basically, because I mean, you can still do some things, you can achieve a lot of things with the Apple platform, but it's just based on your preference. But most of the time, for creatives, Macs are usually the best choice, like what they choose most of the time. So if you're a producer, you're a graphics designer, you're in videography or stuff like that, you may probably want to go for the Mac. And the reason is simple: it's reliable. You have a platform where you have less cases of crashes and things like that. So you don't want to be working on your system and then at some point something pops up, and then all what you've been working on just goes into the abyss and you lose everything. So you want to have something you can work on and be sure that what you're doing on it's safe, less issues of viruses, crashes, errors and things like that. Not that they are not, those things don't happen, they happen, but it's much more reduced when it comes to the Apple platform. So if you've decided which platform you want to go for, either the MacBook or Windows platform, it's pretty much easy. If you're going for the Apple platform, basically you go for a MacBook. But if you're going for the Windows platforms, there are a million options to choose from. There are so many companies. Windows is open source. Anyone you can install Windows on almost anything. You can install Windows on an Android phone. You can put it anywhere. So there are so many options to choose from. But when it comes to laptops now, there are 5 common options which I would talk about. I've worked with these brands and models, and so I can, from a standpoint of what I've seen, recommend models and brands that are fine. So we have HP coming in at number 5. HP is a brand that's been in the PC game for so long a time, and so that gives them that name, that reliability, because they've been there for so long. But then you can have issues with them too. They have issues, and top on the list is counterfeit products. So we have people making fake products for HP now. So you hear of cases where you have accessories being made for HP which are not the original ones, and that is a problem because many people market HP products and accessories and things like that as original, and you may not be able to decipher which is fake or original except you're very, very careful. The second-hand value of HP is not very impressive. Usually it's, especially when it comes to certain models, there's some certain models which have a very poor second-hand value. So number 4 on the list is Asus, and Acer, whichever one. I'm not sure of the pronunciation of that. Asus. So Acer. So this range of laptops usually they are commoner in form of minis. So if you see most people using minis, usually most of them are Acer laptops, and they are reasonably priced, and that makes them a good choice for so many people. They're also reliable in that, I mean, they do a lot of stuff for people basically. They have issues too, but the fact that they are minis and they're portable, they're usable stuff, so makes it very good, and they're well priced. For the Asus laptops, they make gaming laptops that are affordable. That makes them make a very big statement in the competitive market. Number 3 on the list is Lenovo. Lenovo is known for delivering a premium feel at a good price. So Lenovo laptops are laptops that have this business grade kind of feel to them. So if you're a businessman or someone who you carry your laptop as a companion for work and things like that, carry it around, traveling and stuff like that, you enjoy the feel which you have from a Lenovo laptop. They're quite reliable too. They have very little issues and stuff like that, but they have more hardware issues than software issues when it comes to Lenovo laptops. Besides that, usually no other problems. They're a good choice for business owners, business people basically. Number 2, we have the Dell. If you're talking about rugged laptops, I don't mention Dell, then I wonder what you're talking about. They have so many brands that will fit well as rugged laptops. And another thing is that they have very good second-hand value. Their second-hand value is very, very good. So you find a lot of people using more of it, probably even more of second-hand Dell laptops than new or brand new Dell laptops. You find a lot of second-hand Dell laptops, and that's because they have very good second-hand value. And top of the list, of course, is Apple MacBooks. Yes, I've talked about them, but then when it comes to choosing a brand or model, it's still Apple at the top, and the reason is basically because of the reliability of Apple. They also have very good second-hand value, so you could be using a MacBook 2015 in 2021 and you will be perfectly fine with it because it's so reliable. The technology is not far off away. The UI experience is perfect, is great, and the feel of using an Apple it's just Apple basically. It's Apple. Yeah. But then the downside probably, maybe, like I said, there are restrictions to it, but really that depends on you. And another thing is that they're very expensive. Yeah, they're expensive. So you're paying for the premium that comes with the name, not exactly for the features or the spec sheet or anything like that. You're actually paying for the name. Apple doesn't have anything so special. It's just that community. Sometimes I feel Apple is like a sect, They just have this quote kind of thing. And I'm not an Apple user because I like to play a lot with stuff. and Windows gives me the opportunity. I mean, I have a lot of stuff I do on my Windows PC, so that is still my choice. I still go for a Windows PC any day, anytime. But that Apple is a very great choice. And so the third thing you want to look out for, which is probably one of the most important things, because that's what most people are talking about looking into, is processing power. Now, processing power. Now, when it comes to processing power, the single most important part of processing, looking at processing power, is the CPU, the central processing unit. This is the single most important part of processing when it comes to choosing a laptop. And the reason is because the CPU is the brain of the system of whichever laptop you want to get, your computer. The CPU is the brain of your computer, so you want to get something that is efficient, reliable, and effective. Get the work done with as little effort as possible, and is reliable. So that's what you're looking for when you're going for a PC. So broadly speaking, whether you're going for an Apple PC or you're going for a Windows-based PC, most of them run on either the Intel platform or the AMD platforms. Now, these are two manufacturing companies that manufacture CPUs, Intel and AMD. Now, whichever one you go for, whether your system is running on Intel or AMD, it doesn't really, both platforms are very good. It doesn't really have so much of effect on how well your PC does, especially if you are an average user. I mean, you don't have anything specific, but then if you have a specific reason to go for a platform over the other, and that's when you're talking about maybe preferring Intel over AMD, AMD over Intel, and things like that. But both platforms are good. I'm focusing more on the Intel because Intel is by far the most widespread. I'm sure you must have heard about Intel Pentium, Intel Celeron, Intel Core i5, Core i3, Core i7, even Core i9 now. I mean, so and much more common are the Core i3, Core i5, Core i7 series. So these are basically different iterations of the Intel system, and they come in different generations. I'm sure you must have heard of 6th generation, 7th generation, 8th generation, 9th generation, and things like that. So the different iterations come in different generations, and basically what differentiates each generation from the other is how they handle information, how well they handle information. And really, this is what is probably the most important thing when it comes to CPU, how well information given to them is handled. So that's what I want to look out for. Sometimes it's not really about how high the iteration of your Intel is. Maybe you're using a Core i7, Core i9. Sometimes it is not exactly about how fast on paper it is. Most of the time depends on how well it can perform in real world performance, and that is what you should watch out for. So I'm going to explain two things just to give it a better perspective as to understanding the processing power when it comes to CPU. So there are things we call cores when it comes to CPUs. They're called cores. So these are compartments. They're actually hardware. They are compartments in which these CPU platforms work. So you may have a Intel Core i5 working on a dual core, or that's 2 cores, or a quad core, that's 4 cores. So that basically the compartments, like the offices where they work. And then we have what is called the speed, which is the frequency at which these cores work. So these frequencies, these speeds are measured in gigahertz. So I'm sure you must have heard people talk about, okay, maybe you heard Intel Core i5 with a quad core running at 2 gigahertz, that kind of thing. I'm sure you must have heard terminologies like that. So basically, like I said, the cores are the compartments in which those CPU platforms work. and the gigahertz you hear is actually the unit of measurement of the frequency, how fast per second these CPU platforms work. So the number of cores and the speed is not equal to how fast a system is. Like I said, the real world performance is the most important thing. The three most common Intel platforms we have today, the Core i3, Core i5, Core i7, they are pretty much very, very common. And so choosing a Core i3 doesn't mean you lose a lot. Of course, the Core i3 isn't as fast as Core i5. It's not as effective when it comes to processing power as the Core i5. But then you want to look at things like the balance between the speed and the power consumption, because the more processing power you have, the more battery it also consumes. So Core i3 usually, if you want more battery juice, you can go for Core i3. If you're going for the Core i5, the Core i5 and the Core i7, the differences between them aren't so far apart. So I talked about cores, the compartments in which CPU platforms work. The division you have in cores helps you to make work more effective in that sense. So instead of having just one core where every part of the information you feed into the CPU is processed one after the other, if you have two cores, you can distribute that piece of information into those two cores and they are run concurrently. That way you achieve more faster. You understand what I'm trying to say? And then if you have 4 cores, you put the information you receive in 4 cores in each of those cores, and then everything is run concurrently, which is probably more faster. But then does 4 cores mean it's generally going to be faster than a 2 core? Now it's a combination of number of cores, the iteration of the of the Intel, and the frequency. So if you have a Core i5 running with 4 cores running at 2 gigahertz would run objectively at the same speed as a Core i7 with 2 cores running at 4 gigahertz. I don't know if you get that. So basically it's about the combination of what it has. So the Core i5 has 4 cores. It can feed information into those 4 cores and they run concurrently at the same time, and they each run at 2 gigahertz. Then you have the Core i7. If you can have a Core i7 that has 2 cores. So if the Core i7 has 2 cores and those 2 cores are running at 4 gigahertz, it's just 2, but then they are running at a faster speed. But then you have much more to process on those 2, much more load as compared to the Core i5, which has 4 cores running at 2 gigahertz. So you can have more. There's more division of labor in that sense. Wow! Am I making sense? The idea I'm just trying to put to you is that whether it's Core i5, Core i7 may not really mean it's faster. Most Core i7s come with the number of cores can range from 2 to 8, while in Core i5 you can usually, most of the time, they come with 4 cores on most systems. And when it comes to, like I said, when it comes to real performance, when it comes to performance, it's actually a thing of real world performance than what is written than the numbers. So it's actually how well it performs real time. And so you may need to actually ask people, look into, maybe search online and look at what people have said about the performance to actually get a true value of how well it does. I've seen a Core i5 perform better than a Core i7. It's possible because of the combination of the iteration, the number of cores, and then the speed, the frequencies. And so that is very important. There are other aspects of CPU processing. We have what we call the graphics systems, the graphics memory, basically. So we have what we call the GPU, graphics processing unit, and dedicated video RAM and stuff like that. So those things also help to process information faster. That combined and the amount of RAM you actually have, that combined together with the CPU, that 3 combination I talked about, will actually go a long way in determining how fast your system is. baseline is that real world performance is actually the true test of how well a CPU would do. So now we go to the RAM story. Most people talk about RAM as if it's the most important thing when it comes to CPU, when it comes to processing power. It is very important, but most of the time we glorify it over the CPU platform, which is actually a tad more important than the RAM. The RAM actually is that part of your storage. Now, when it comes to storage, you have two parts of storage. We have what we call the primary storage system and secondary storage systems. The primary storage systems are things like they are actually temporary. Yeah, so there are storage systems that are used to process information. They process information. They store information for a temporarily. They do not store information permanently. While secondary storage systems store information permanently. So your RAM falls into a primary storage system. What it basically does is that it takes the amount of memory it has is actually what it uses to process information. So memory is used to process information. That's what RAM is, random access memory. So the amount of RAM you have, yes, of course, goes a long way to determine how fast your system is. But really, it's not an additive process. Sometimes it may be an exponential process. What do I mean by that? So the difference between in some certain CPU processes, you may not really find so much of a difference between an 8 gig RAM system or a 16 gig RAM system. Sometimes you may find very little difference between a 16 gig RAM and a 32 gig RAM difference. So usually the most significant differences you have are usually in exponential jumps between one RAM and the other. So if you want to see very, 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 very visible differences between RAM systems, I'll say put an 8 gig RAM beside a 32 gig RAM system. You would probably see significant differences. So it depends on what you're doing. Now, if you're someone like an average user and stuff like that, I think you'll be okay with an 8 gigs of RAM. You don't need more than that. If you're into design, 3D modeling, and all that kind of pro stuff, honestly, if you want to have very good, if you want to enjoy what you're doing well, pro level stuff now, like creatives and stuff like that, 3D design, video rendering and stuff like that, if you want to have a good time with it, I'll say go with 32 gig RAM or a 64 gig RAM at least. But then a 16 gig RAM will do well. It's not bad, it's good enough. But then generally speaking, I won't advise that you go below 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you want to go below 8 gigabytes of RAM, let your floor be 4 gigabytes of RAM. And when you're talking about 4 gigabytes of RAM, it means that you're pretty much an average user. Like, you don't use your system for shit, that kind of thing. So, but if you want something that is just very reliable, you use it for stuff, but pretty much general stuff, but very, very reliable, I think you should stick with 8 gigabytes of RAM. You'll be fine with that. I know creatives who use 8 gigabytes of RAM for processing heavy stuff, and that takes me to the reason why RAM doesn't really decide how fast or how well your system runs. It's a combination of all those CPU stuff I talked about earlier. Your RAM is just the memory it uses to process information. That's all, basically. So I've seen people creatives use 8 gigabytes of RAM and they're fine. When it comes to battery, so if you have a system with Core i7, 8 cores and all that, your system is going to be fast, it's going to do very well, but then your battery is not going to last so long. It's going to reduce the battery levels so much. But if you have a Core i3, which is just dual core, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of juice on the battery if it's the same battery that you have on comparatively on a Core i7 with 8 cores. So you're going to get so much more juice of battery on that kind of system. So really it's a mix of how well your CPU performs and the battery capacity of your system. So that's what you want to look out for. So I would say 4 hours of battery life should be the least you should be looking out for. Like I said, we have the CPU, which is the brain of the computer, processes information and stuff like that. But we also have a part of the CPU which handles graphics, handles how the information is displayed to you on your screen, the graphics unit of your system. So usually most systems come with that graphics part usually integrated together with your CPU. So you hear people talk about a particular CPU with integrated graphics, that kind of thing. So usually a portion of your RAM is allocated to this part of the CPU to run graphics well. So a part of your memory is given to that part of the system, so that part of the CPU can run smoothly and give you graphics, and basically helps what you see to be more palatable, more enjoyable, that kind of thing. And in some systems we have that graphics part of the system as a separate component from the CPU. So in that case, we have a separate unit for it and a separate memory, separate everything. In that case, we will say that system has a dedicated graphics card. I'm sure you must have heard about that. Usually, the companies that that produce that, the common ones are NVIDIA. The commonest by far is NVIDIA. We also have AMD graphics too. NVIDIA usually is paired with Intel devices most of the time, and so that part is very important for you if you are someone who is into 3D modeling, who is into graphics design, pro stuff kind of graphics design, and then maybe people who are into doing heavy video rendering or things like that. But if you're pretty much an average user, or you just do light graphics that are not so much motion intensive, graphic intensive, that kind of stuff, you'll find with a system that has an integrated graphics memory. And I was talking about battery, and if you buy a system that has a separate graphics card, most of the time this graphics card take a lot of battery juice. So you must be ready to come to terms with that. So usually gaming laptops are usually laptops that have this separate graphics component, because gaming is a heavy motion is a heavy motion part of CPU processing. You have a lot of things happening on your screen and all that, so you need a separate component that handles all that well and presents the information like you want it, makes the game buttery smooth, the graphics come out well and things like that. So if you're going for a gaming laptop, which we usually have a separate component, you must be ready to understand that the battery life most of the time won't be so good. So most gaming laptops, most of them have an average of about 4 hours, some of them 3 hours, especially when you're gaming, and then max of 5-6 hours. But then if you have a system that has an integrated graphics memory, or integrated graphics card, so to speak, you will have the graphics component is plastered together with the CPU, and so that way you have less power consumption, because you don't have a separate component which would draw power. Sometimes you may think that you need, as a creative, you may think that you need something that is graphic intensive, that will be able to handle graphics intensive stuff, as regards getting something that has a separate graphics processing unit. But sometimes you may not exactly need it. If you're not into pro level stuff, you're like movie creation, that kind of thing, that kind of stuff, you may not exactly need that. I use a system that has an integrated graphics card, and I'm into videography and things like that. I'm into graphics design and stuff like that, and it works fine for me. It's not as fast as I would probably want it to be, but then it does the job just well. But the major reason why I had to go for that was, because I wanted something that won't be heavy. I wanted something that will also be able to handle that will also have extended battery. An extended battery life. Because of the kind of environment I find myself, I need that battery juice. And so now we come to storage. So storage is the two types of storage we have when it comes to secondary storage. I talked about primary and secondary storage. So storage here is secondary storage. Storage that the part of storage that stores information permanently. So we have two types. We have the solid state drives, and we have the hard disk drives. And the oldest and probably the commonest are the hard disk drives, because they're cheap, they're readily available, they're all over the place. And we have the solid state drives. So what are the differences between these two? Which one should you choose between these two? Talking about SSD and HDD is a whole topic on its own, and it would take a whole separate video to be able to look in depth into what one has over the other. But for the sake of getting a laptop, just understand that hard disk drives they have moving parts, they have moving components, they have magnets. It's like having they have moving parts, they have magnets, they have a lot of solid components, moving parts and all that, while SSDs are just basically almost like a piece of circuit board. So they are significantly less heavier, they are less prone to mechanical faults, because they're just basically a circuit board and things like that. So that's one advantage that SSDs have over HDDs. The most important difference between an SSD and a HDD is the speed. An SSD is almost 10 times faster, if not up to that, than an HDD, because everything is on the circuit board. There are no moving parts. There is no information is not stored in parallel forms. Don't let me go into that, but basically they are much more faster because they're just a circuit board and no magnets, no movements, things like that. The caveat is that SSDs are usually very expensive, so usually most laptops wouldn't come with a very large amount of memory when it comes to SSD. Usually they come with 128GB SSD, 256, 500. So if you have systems that have 1TB SSD, 2GB SSD, 1TB, 2TB SSD, then usually they're very expensive. And so a 1GB hard drive will be cheaper than a 1GB counterpart on the SSD side. So you may probably want to choose a hard disk drive because it's cheaper. So most systems that come with hard disk drive are cheaper. But now we have hybrid systems. We have hybrid computers that have both. They have a slot for both an SSD and a hard disk drive. So you can actually install your applications in those two partitions. So you can run your operating system and run maybe apps that you use most of the time. You can run those on your SSD, then just use the HDD component for just storage. So you can have maybe 128GB or 256GB of SSD as the primary storage, where you have your OS and your maybe applications that you use most of the time. So that way you have the good side of both sides in that sense. We also have systems now that have HDD and SSD combined into one storage system. So that could also be a choice for you, whichever one you prefer. And so that's pretty much it when it comes to choosing systems. There's so much to talk about when it comes to choosing a system if you want to go much more in depth into these things, but this it's kind of a long video, yeah, but I mean, we try to talk about these things in a little bit more detail so they can have just some perspective into these things a little bit. If we were to go so much in depth into them, I mean, we're gonna spend hours on these topics. There are other things to look into, other peripherals you want to look into, depending on your taste and maybe a few other things that you may want to have on your system. So you may be thinking about the kind of screen you have. So if you're a creative, you may want a full HD screen, a quad HD screen, a 4K screen, and maybe you want a touch screen, maybe you want a convertible system, those kind of things. I talked about a few of these things in the previous video I talked about too. So whichever one you want, then maybe the screen size too. So most creatives, most of the time, they want large screens, maybe 17, 15 inches, that kind of thing, or maybe just want a 14-inch screen. Depends on you. Then the resolution of the kind of screen you want to get, those are things that you may want to look into. And those things also border on battery life too. So know that the more you have, the more capabilities you have, you're probably gonna have the less battery life. Other things, maybe the kind of Bluetooth technology it has, maybe Bluetooth 5.1 or those kind of things. Then the usability and functionality of the computer, especially when it comes to things like the number of ports it has, how heavy it is, maybe it's thin, it's large. I talked about some of these things in the previous video. And but then when it comes to the number of ports and things like that, there are ways around it. You could buy an adapter, so you just have maybe just 2 USB spaces, you can get an adapter. As we move on with technology, things are becoming much more smaller, much more portable, and then that informs the kind of functionality that you can get from this kind of system. So depending on what you want, you get what you can get, what kind of taste you really buy into. There are other things like fingerprints, iris scanners, speakers, and then there's some brands that work with design companies, maybe HP working with Bang & Olufsen to help them design the kind of sound that comes out of their laptops and things like that. We also have webcam and keyboard light. Keyboard light, as trivial as it sounds, is a singular reason why one may not want to buy one laptop over the other, because depending on the kind of work you're doing, you may be working in the night, so you want to put a lamp you want to carry a lamp around because you cannot see your keyboard in the night. You want something that has an inbuilt keyboard light and backlight and all that. So things like that are things you should also look into. But the ones I've talked about are the major things you should look into. And I think if you are able to work your way around just having a perspective understanding of these things, I don't think you have any problem getting your new system and your new computer, your new laptop. And I think that's pretty much it. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a comment in the comment section below, drop a like, and if you have not subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Stay safe. I'm Ayo Adeyemi, and this is Datad.